No, this time I
do.
think they are.
Good evening. We're here for a workshop on the LCIP. Ed and Heather.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, as you know, the City Charter requires that we annually prepare a capital improvement plan. Our plan covers a 5-year period, and we normally present it early in January. We have to present it to the Council 5.5 months in advance of the end of the fiscal year. And then at the same time, it goes to the Planning Board and the Finance Committees, members of which are here tonight with us, for their review to make a recommendation back to the City Council prior to adopting the plan. As a reminder, a capital plan does not necessarily mean what's approved in the capital plan is funded. The funding process comes later in the budget process when we actually have to make decisions about what we can afford, what we can't afford, and where we will fund things from. But the intent of presenting the capital plan first is so that it informs the rest of the budget process. As we go through the budget, you'll have this information as a starting point. And of course, as you know, we often spend a chunk of time late in the budget process talking about capital items, where we're going to fund them, and trying to find alternatives and make changes and adjustments. So the fiscal year, oops, point at the right place. Fiscal year plan, or the 5-year plan, calls for $167.6 million in projects, and about $140 million of that would come from city resources. Broken down a little bit more, you can see here on this chart the top 3 items: the city bond issue, the city operating budget, and the school bond issue. Those are all items which relate directly pretty much to our general fund. The remainder of the issues relate to our utility fund or our enterprise funds associated with TIFs and things like that. So, but again, most of the funding is in the general fund. About $14.4 million in the first year is general fund related items, and $7.5 million relate to utilities and other. Proposed bond issues, here you can see a breakdown by year, city, school, water, sewer, and stormwater. And again, you'll see some variation on the city side. That variation tends to be tied to particular projects. So in 2021, for example, the city, that's one of the years that we'll be doing a fire station, as is 2023. And 2023 is also impacted, or actually 2021 is impacted by the school department's proposal to do some additional construction at the high school for an additional classroom wing and to deal with arts and music, things like that in their programs. And in 2023, we also are looking at, that's the year we currently have in our schedule for expansion of Lincoln Street Garage. So that year has both the garage expansion and the high school project is in 2021. That high school project, if we get to that point, will clearly be required to have a referendum because it will exceed the amount on any individual project that the City Council can. Oops. And this is the same information just shown in more graphical form with the different colors representing the city general fund, schools, water, sewer, and stormwater. One of the things that I think we can all take some pride in is that over the years we've managed to reduce our outstanding debt by a fairly considerable amount. Back a few years ago, the city side was up closer to $90 million, Heather? Yeah. We brought that down to 44.3. However, we still do obviously have a considerable amount of outstanding debt. General fund related issues, which are city pension and school, it's about $68.7 million, $51.8 million in utility debt, and then there's $22.6 million in debt that has been authorized but has not yet been issued. Some of that is for projects that have been approved in past years that haven't yet been constructed or needed, and some of it's ancillary protection, guaranteed bonds tied to our parking requirements and parking agreement with Bates Mill Complex and its redevelopment. In terms of debt service as a percentage of budget, this year our debt service on the city side, it represents about 19.3% of the general fund. Schools about 10.1%, so on a combined basis it's about 13.4%. A few years ago, we were up on the city side in the 22-23% range, so we have managed to bring that down some. We probably could have brought it down further, but we really tried to make a strong effort to shorten our debt service repayment schedule to reduce the amount of interest paid over time. This shows in the chart what we've done, both in terms of outstanding principal and outstanding interest. You can see again, up over $100 million in fiscal year 2005. We've brought that down to a much more manageable level at this point, and you can really see the impact on interest. By refinancing bonds, by paying off the Colisée debt, and by adhering to, as much as we could, the 80% limit that's in our ordinance, we've managed to bring our debt down to a much lower level. One of the things that's interesting, and maybe a different way of looking at debt, is our outstanding general fund principal and interest as a percentage of state-adjusted value. State-adjusted value is our kind of market value of the entire community for tax purposes. You can see in fiscal year 2011 and 2012, we were at 3.8%, and that came down all the way to 1.9%, and it's eased up a little bit to 2.2%. But I think it really does show the impact of what we've tried to do with debt management, that we've managed to bring that number down, both in terms of a total number and also in terms of our state-adjusted value. As I've mentioned, we've managed to do that through a number of debt management methods, lowering the debt authorization limit to 80%, refinancing debt when possible. We refinance basically just about everything that is possible to be refinanced. Attempting to move recurring expenditures into the operating budget, that has not been as successful, but we have managed to move some of those items into fund balance rather than borrowing. This last year was over $4 million in fund balance. Don't know that we can continue at that level, but certainly we'll have some flexibility again this year to try to cover some of our capital needs through fund balance. So that's, again, something we need to keep in mind. I would dearly love to get some of these recurring expenses into our operating budget, such as vehicle and equipment replacement and paving. Those are things we do every year, and if we borrow for those, we're just obviously increasing the long-term costs. But we just haven't been able to do that given some of the other restrictions we've had, and given the fact that to a certain extent we're still struggling to come out of some of the impacts of the recession, particularly as it applies to state funding and the kinds of hits we've taken in revenue sharing and some other areas. Future year debt service requirements, this is for the city's general fund only. This year it's about $8.9 million. You can see it declines over time, then hits a big drop in fiscal year 22. That represents the year we finally pay off the remainder of our pension obligation debt. So that will no longer be required, and that certainly would be something to keep in mind in terms of planning for the future, looking how to manage our debt going forward, that we do have that drop. Be aware that these numbers do not take into account any debt that would be authorized and issued in those years that has not yet been placed or actually borrowed. So this is kind of, if we don't ever borrow anything else, that's what the numbers look like. We obviously will, as going forward, have some additional borrowing. I want to go over some of the projects that we're looking at this year. The numbers that are in green represent projects that are recommended for funding through a bond issue. Airport projects, the big one there, of course, is the airport reconstruction of the runway. That is primarily going to be paid for through a federal grant, but does require some local match, $200,000 from both us and from Auburn. Construction of a new fuel farm. Their current fuel farm is underground tanks. They will be required by DEP to be replaced in 2021. So the funding here would allow them to get that project going so that they could meet that DEP requirement. Emergency 911 has another large project. That's our radio replacement project, $4.1 million to be split between Auburn and Lewiston. In addition, because that's the core system, that's the 911 dispatching system with their radios and equipment, we will also have to replace all of our mobiles and portables because we'll be going to 800 megahertz. LA 911 already has those frequencies assigned, so there's progress being made there. So that's going to be a considerable additional amount of $865,000 for Lewiston, and be a little bit less for Auburn. We have more radios than they do. There's a continuing effort to finish the site connectivity process, which will allow them to communicate with all of their towers and all of their equipment through microwave rather than through telephone lines, which have been problematic in the past. And then they have a project for replacing fire alarm box system and station alerting, a system that's used by 911 to call out the actual fire response. Transit Committee, this is pretty typical from year to year. They're looking to replace a bus with city share of $50,000. We've been doing that pretty uniformly for the last 7-8 years.
Easily.
We have included some money for your consideration for the marketing campaign that we've had some discussions about recently, but that's something obviously we'll be visiting more as going forward. Parking and parking garage initiative. Sometime within the next month or so, we will be presenting the on-street parking study, which obviously is going to try to address our need to replace our on-street parking meters. We are also exploring and want to discuss with you as we get into the budget process, professional management of our parking garages through contract for management. We believe that we don't know what we're doing when it comes to parking garage management.
Truth.
At least I'm willing to admit it. And there would be some potential real value and probably some economic benefits for us bringing some company or someone in to actually manage our system to help us maximize our revenues, deal with some of the customer service problems we have at our garages, and look at upgrading and revising some of our systems that operate and manage our garages. Assessing, once again, is including money for something we're going to have to eventually at some point do, which is the citywide revaluation. We're still above the 70% level that would necessarily mandate it, but it's something that's been sitting there for some time, and we want to keep that on everyone's radar screen. Economic and community development, they've included $100,000 as some beginning seed money toward canal ownership projects, trying to deal with implementing the Riverfront Island Master Plan and trying to make those more of an asset for the community. We also have funding, again, recommended for the Riverfront Island and implementation. I think what staff is thinking about, and we'll talk more about this also, is a continuation of the improvements that have been made to the entrance and carrying what's been done from Lincoln Street down to the pedestrian bridge, through from the other side in the park all the way down to the pedestrian bridge over the river. That seems to be what people are leaning toward. One of the things I think we do need to start talking about is what we want to really do with the canal system now that we finally own it. I think there's some possibilities of doing some pretty spectacular things there, and I think we'll try to put some information together for you to look at as we go forward on that. In the MIS department, they're looking at technology upgrades. There are a couple of big projects here. The two biggest of them are replacing our tax software, upgrading and replacing our tax software, which is old and antiquated. Correct, Heather?
Correct.
And
the same system since I've been here.
that would qualify.
Yes.
And then some dark fiber replacement. Right now, we lease fiber to connect a lot of our facilities, and trying to replace that with a better quality system and less cost over time is in there, plus a lot of other smaller things, including starting to do some upgrading with our core switches that serve the library and the police department, and additional storage for data upstairs. Police department building expansion. It's not so much an expansion as a condition and space assessment. As you know, we did a condition assessment of all of our substations in the fire department. We do have problems at the police station, both in terms of some structural issues that have arisen over the years, plus some of the basic core mechanical systems have aged. So before we decide how to deal with that building going forward, we think it would be a good idea to have a building assessment done. And I think you've also heard from time to time the police chiefs argue for more space, so I think we need to take a look at space allocation in the building and try to determine what the needs are, with the notion of putting together a plan on how we're going to proceed in the future with that building. So that's something, again, that I think this is a start toward that by doing the kind of study that would give us the information we need on how to go forward. Main Street Fire Station replacement, what we're looking at there is just the funding that will be necessary for the next land purchase to replace the Main Street station. And then on the building side, City Hall stairway project, the back stairway needs some improvements if you've been back there in order to bring it up to standards as a second means of egress from the upper floors of the building. Public Works is looking and we've talked about this for a number of years, toward trying to at some point get a vehicle and equipment wash facility that they could share both with the bus system, with other possible users. That would be a down payment on starting the process. There's probably a $500,000 plus project to put the kind of facility in we need. And then some entrance security upgrades. The police department in particular needs to have some security upgrades done in the building for it to meet its certification requirements and to basically keep the building operating safely with the kind of security that it needs. We would eventually like to expand that into other parts of the city with the idea we'd have a central security system that could be handling all of our buildings through using a card system as opposed to which key works this week and where are all the keys and who has them, and just trying to get a little bit better control over security and entrance into our buildings and facilities. Public Works on the highway side, Adams Avenue, you may know there's a retaining wall that runs along Adams Avenue from the Public Works facility back towards Knox Street. That retaining wall is failing and needs to be replaced, and so we're looking at about $150,000 there. Sidewalk work on Birch, Karen, Jefferson streets, which would include some curb work, both granite and concrete, would run $700,000. The crosswalk, the street crosswalk evaluation implementation is trying to pick up on some of the recommendations that came forward in the pedestrian study. We're suggesting a couple $100,000 toward beginning to address those issues. Sidewalk maintenance and rehabilitation, $360,000 or so. That's what we've been budgeting the last couple of years in that range, so that we can begin to at least reduce some of our sidewalks. And a street maintenance program at $2.67 million. In the book, in the detail, there is a listing of the projects that are on the infamous list. One of the things I would ask that you all do is please take a look at that and let us know if there are any other issues that have come up over the last year or any other streets that you're concerned about, so that we can take a look at that and make sure we have that covered and discussed when we get into the actual funding of the plan.
Can I just ask a quick question? So you've got Birch, Karen, and Jefferson Street sidewalk rehabilitation pulled out from sidewalk maintenance and rehabilitation. Why?
Because of the volume, the large volume of that particular project. The other sidewalk the sidewalk maintenance is more of just ceiling cracks and so forth. But to the city administrator's point, the city street maintenance program listing is on page 66, is the detail listing of that.
We do have some MDOT projects coming up, which is good news because most of those, the vast majority of that is paid for by the state. Main Street from the Longley Bridge all the way out to Pettingill Street will be done. It's a state project. Sabattus Street from Main Street to Randall Road will be done. That will pretty much have completed Sabattus Street all the way out past Grove and out beyond. within the last few years. And then phase 2 of our signal upgrade project will allow us to continue our efforts to interconnect our traffic signals so that we get better traffic movement in the community. We're also starting to look at, there's some new technology coming out for traffic signals, which basically is using sophisticated AI kinds of algorithms. So that may be an option that we would go to rather than what we've been doing in the past, which is basically the ability to easily change the timing at an intersection, but it hasn't been necessarily real-time adjustments. So we're going to be taking a look at that as maybe a possibility there too. Municipal garage equipment, $1.5 million roughly. There is a listing included again in the book.
Page 76 is that one.
And the big things there are a couple of major pieces of equipment, including 2 loaders with plow equipment, and also the catch basin cleaner, which is a very expensive piece of equipment. So those are the three biggest things there, plus a couple of other plow trucks. Municipal garage, okay, Public Works Open Space, Hudson Bus Soccer Field, we're looking at funding that project. That's the Land and Water Conservation project to replace some of the property that was used for the new school, plus some other property that was reallocated from recreational use. There is a layout included in your book for that page. It shows you what we're looking at there. Basically, it'd be 2 soccer fields with parking, off-street parking. The initial plan that's in the book included a couple of pickleball courts, 4 pickleball courts. Those we've been talking about potentially putting those someplace else, maybe in conjunction with the new fire station on North Temple Street, so that we would have a fire station with some associated recreational opportunities and some park amenities for the neighborhood as well. But that's something we haven't fully decided, but we'll be talking about as we go forward. The school department, their list is starting with the middle school electrical upgrade to bring the electrical system up to current standards. Same at Montello School. Another project is district-wide security camera replacement. Right now, the school department has 176 cameras. They are all old and need to be replaced at some point. They would also like to add about 100 more, plus all of the associated, equipment that goes with that, the storage that's necessary, and the sites that are necessary to have the ability to access those cameras. They're also looking for a building access control system upgrade. They want to do something similar to what we're talking about, which is to have a system-wide security system on their buildings. This would be, again, the first step in that process to start going toward a card automated system where they had better control over security and entrance into the building. And then, of course, the new high school classroom wing, that $800,000 is just the start of that project. The total project cost is roughly $14.5 million, and that, as I mentioned earlier, would require a referendum. Water division. We have a software model that helps us plan and operate our water system that is no longer, that automated system is no longer being supported, so we need to replace it. We want to continue our SCADA upgrades program, which is going to allow us to better integrate all of our control mechanisms at the various towers and water towers and facilities that are in the system so that we can manage it better. We are proposing at least having a contingency authorization for $2.4 million in case we do need to do a full algae treatment at Lake Auburn. We did a small treatment this last year to deal with the algae problems that we were starting to see. This would be a more significant treatment that would also have more long-term effect in that it would allow us to bind up some of the nitrogen that gets released from sediments in the bottom and keep it from getting into the water and sponsoring or supporting algae growth. But it's not something we will necessarily have to do. It's just something we've talked about having in the past. Now we would like to formalize it a little bit. Continuing our distribution water main replacement rehabilitation program at $2 million. A couple of small equipment replacements. I think these are the two trucks that we weren't able to purchase this year that we swapped out the valve turning trailer. So they're back in plan for next year. Sinking fund for Lake Auburn watershed protection. Those funds are used for projects to help maintain water quality, either through actually doing physical improvements to, say, some of the areas around the lake. In the past, it's also been used to some extent to purchase property along the lake to preserve it from creating issues in the watershed. And then the meter program, two elements to that. One is just our typical meter replacement. We have to replace our meters on about a 10-year cycle. And a significant part of it, however, is to replace them with the radio meters so that we can start moving even further away from the need for meter readers to drive around the city and collect data, so going to a more automated system. Sewer, typical stuff again, rehabilitation of old sanitary mains, a couple of small pieces of equipment. Collection system inspection and rehabilitation, we have been involved in a multi-year program of inspecting all of our sewers so that we know what condition they're in and can come up with a plan that assists us in assessing what we need to do. Part of that is the criticality and risk assessment so that we know which sewers should be given the highest priority for replacement or renovation. And then pump station replacement, we have, I think, something like 6 pump stations that are at or near end of life, and we've been gradually replacing them over time. This is continuing on with doing one more. This one is on Chadbourne Road. Stormwater, Hartbrook water quality restoration. The Hartbrook is an urban impaired stream. We are required by DEP to implement a watershed management plan that will improve stream quality. You may recall this last year, or maybe was it this year or last year, a year ago, we put in a subsurface bioretention facility on Webster out near the industrial park. This plan is to continue that with 2 more in the industrial park area, and they'll be coordinated with some street paving and reconstruction. Storm drain inspection. We have a lot of storm drains in the community. We've been inspecting and cleaning them, so we're trying to continue that program to eventually get all of those cleaned up. Some of this stuff is pretty much required in a consent order with the State Department of Environmental Protection. Small amount of money for dealing with storm drains that are affected by road rehabilitation projects, and then continuing the Jepson Brook Channel upgrade. This project will replace the culvert, one of the culverts on the stream that is a bottleneck for stream flow. We're trying to get to a point where we're not as concerned that Jepson Brook might exceed its capacity in a heavy rainstorm. Our debt authorization limit, which is obviously something we look at every year. This is our calculation. I won't go through all of it, but the debt limitation, the 80% limit for next year, is a little over $7 million. Again, it's based on 80% of the average amount of principal that we've paid off over the last 3 years. And then the other calculation that's always the key to how we proceed is where do we stand between what's been requested and what the limit is. And as you can see, we are about $7.3 million over the limit. So again, as we had last year, we're going to have to do some hard work to try to see how much we can manage that difference. Calendar, just so you know, February 5th, we will have a public hearing in front of the City Council. On the 18th or before, the Finance Committee and Planning Board's recommendations are needed for the council packet. On the 19th of February, the council is scheduled to adopt the LCIP, and the March 1st is the required date by which it must be adopted. And again, just to reemphasize, again, adopting the LCIP does not mean it's funded. Funding decisions come later as we get into considerations in the annual budget, looking at our fund balance and any possibilities of funding things there, and then looking at the actual bond authorization itself. So that's kind of a quick overview. I know we'll probably spend a lot more time on these as we go through the budget process, but we'll be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Councilor West?
Yes, thank you. Your kind of presentation on PowerPoint was a bit different than what was in the book, and I'm just, to be able to be helpful to have that format, for especially the projects.
It's pretty much tracked what was in the book, just done in a little bit larger format, because otherwise you can't read it on a screen.
Yeah, because I was trying to make notes to some of your references, and it was just, the sequence was a little off, and I just wondered if we could get a copy of that, just
Oh,
the
yes.
projects.
Of what was here? Yeah, there
Because it's a little different than here.
may have been changed a little bit from the copy that you got last, that went out with the agenda, but it's not dramatically different.
I think it's because it includes all 5 years instead of
Okay.
just 1 year at a
Yeah,
time.
I was basically in the presentation focusing on the current year.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone? Dennis? All right. You guys are off the hook tonight.
Okay, and for the benefit of the members of the planning board and the finance committee who are here, staff will be more than happy to come to your meetings and discuss any projects that you'd like to discuss.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much, and thank you for Finance Committee and Planning Board for coming to this portion of the workshop. Now we will move on. Presentation by Groups Recover Together.
Sit right here. Both of you can present right from here. Are you presenting? I'm
Oh, well, I'm gonna make you do something.
Thank you. I think we can share.
All right, well, hello, everyone. My name's Chet Adams. I'm with Groups Recover Together. And Megan was telling me that not too long ago there was a presentation that was done on Suboxone and medication-assisted treatment. And it kind of seemed like that they were asking the city for some things, and I wanted to add some clarity to that. The Groups Recover Together, we're not really asking the city for anything other than to let us be an existing business in your downtown area. And I got a quick presentation here, and I want to leave some time for questions. Okay, easy one. So we were founded in 2014 in New Hampshire by doctors from Dartmouth Hitchcock, and who wanted to meet the opioid epidemic head-on by bringing affordable and convenient treatment to rural areas. And since that time, 2014, we've grown into 6 states with 52 offices and 400 groups every week. And after 6 months at group, 95% of our patients attend counseling every week, and 85% of our patients are totally abstinent from opiates. And this is done through testing, urine testing to be sure that they're opiate-free. Suboxone, and I was kind of hoping that Dr. Little had come with us today. He's one of the medical doctors. We have a doctor on, two doctors on staff. And so he could really just talk about this a little bit better. I'm just going to kind of read it off so that I don't get it wrong. But buprenorphine is a partial agonist that partially fills opioid receptors, which allows the medication to prevent withdrawal and has a sealing effect, which prevents abuse. And naloxone is an opioid blocker. Naloxone is basically Narcan. It's the same thing that they use in the ERs to revive folks who've overdosed. And it's also in the medication of Suboxone. It's part of that medication. It's an opioid blocking agent which acts as an added level of safety and is only activated when an opioid is taken in addition to Suboxone. So if they take anything else, the heroin, fentanyl, or anything else, they won't have the effect of that drug because the naloxone will fill that receptor or the receptors. And we only prescribe up to 16 milligrams a day because of what's called a sealing effect. 16 milligrams basically gives our members the dosage that they need to stay away from other drugs and also to fight off the withdrawal that they have from not being on an opiate. Therapy is the foundation of our program. We require members to engage in group therapy on a weekly basis and only provide up to 7-day prescriptions at a time. Some programs provide 30-day prescriptions. But we believe it's important for patients to engage with us, with their counselor, and group weekly to succeed in treatment. We're really all about groups. That's our name. And it's the center of what we do. The medication has a very big effect on treating opiate dependence, but the long-term changes that need to happen for our members are what's going to happen in group. Accountability is critical to us. But often the group members hold each other accountable. That's one of the dynamics of doing things in group, is that if one of the members is kind of, not really that serious, other members will call them out on that. And our program is time limited, that we're looking to have everyone completing treatment within 18 to 24 months. That's our goal for them. There are some folks that need to stay a little bit longer, depending upon how many years they've been using opiates, how long their addiction has been around. We take a multidisciplinary care approach. We have a care coordination team that is working with all the local resources for mental health and hospitalization. We communicate with St. Mary's a lot in order for our members to be able to get all the services they need for everything. Not just their addiction, but to be able to get their mental health especially under control so that they can regain control. We employ proven best practices to reduce diversion and misuse. And this is really about that we don't want a bunch of Suboxone getting out on the streets. We do urine drug screenings weekly. All of our members have pharmacy homes, so they can't go to just any pharmacy. They have to go specifically to the one that they choose. They have a 7-day prescription, and no more than that. Random pill counts, 15% of all of our members are called in every month for a pill count. And that, that's to check their medication and make sure that they have the same amount of medication that they should have. And we also use a prescription monitoring program in the state of Maine. We have that wonderful program that allows us to see whether or not they're being prescribed other opiates from other doctors. And we check that at intake and then randomly throughout treatment. The opiate epidemic is flooding our nation's prisons and jails. Prisoners, 53% of our state and 45% of federal prisoners met the DSM criteria for drug use disorder. 20% of inmates have a history of injection drug use. 24 to 36% of all known heroin users pass through the criminal justice system each year. And 96% of individuals incarcerated for drug-related crimes return to drug use within 3 years of release. And one of the things that we've started at Groups is we're communicating with the local jails to have inmates, when they're released, come directly to us for treatment. And for those who are known drug abusers. This is something we just very recently started, and it's really about that when somebody gets out of jail, that's the time that they make either the wrong decision or the right, and we want them to come directly to us and not even give them the chance to go home first. Medication-assisted treatment reduces recidivism rates. The recidivism in prison is lowest when inmates participate in 8+ months of medication-assisted treatment. And receiving a combination of medication-assisted treatment and therapy yields higher retention rates. Yet the criminal justice system is referring only 4.6% of clients to evidence-based treatment. So we're not really getting the referrals from the jail, which is why we've gone in there to get them. What our clients say, I can't really read that too well because it's pretty small, but that will be in the PowerPoint here if anyone needs it. Certainly that our clients are, one of the problems with treatment and getting the message out is that we have a lot of rules around confidentiality, protecting confidentiality for our members. And so their stories don't get out unless they want to bring them out. So we kind of have to keep their messages. But I can tell you from working on the front lines of this problem for probably almost 15 years now, that folks in medication-assisted treatment definitely do get better. Some of them are living lives that I'd like to have. 91 Americans die every day from overdose. In the state of Maine, I don't know if we have that figure here, but this past year it was 417, for 2017 it was 417 overdoses in the state of Maine that died. And so it's a real problem. And at Groups, we're really trying to do everything we can to, one of our statements, and it's in the packet here, I think maybe I'll finish with this, is in every group, we read we have an opening and a closing statement, and if I can find it in the book here, that our opening declaration is that at Groups we are a community of people fighting the opiate epidemic together. Beating opiates is hard, but it's not impossible. Groups uses medication prescribed by responsible doctors, evidence-based practice that actually works, and the power of people with common problems working together to find common solutions. It's not magic, it's not a miracle. We make a simple promise. If we listen to our doctors, listen to our counselors, and listen to each other, we can change. We can change so much that we can begin to imagine a life without drugs, and then we can change more. Together, finding, living, and enjoying a life without drugs is possible. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Councilor Clute?
So, thank you for your presentation, and thanks for coming tonight and the work that you do. Megan, you and I have had this conversation. I don't think anyone here thinks that there's a silver bullet to solving this problem, and I think that as a council, we kind of think that it's going to take a collaborative effort in this community to sort of combat this. And I will say what I said to the last group that came and presented here, and that is to really try to work in collaboration with the other folks who are doing this work. One of them is Kathy Ryder through Tri-County Mental Health, and you may have already touched base with her, but she has a community recovery steering committee and is really sort of bringing all the stakeholders to the table. And so I think it's just important for all the stakeholders to be in one place at one time having the conversation to sort of really get at the issue here. So thanks.
Councilor Lyson?
Thank you, Mayor. Housing wasn't brought up at all. Where do your patients kind of live during their treatment process? So.
Well, we provide outpatient counseling, but for the homeless or for, we have we're an opiate health home, which means that we provide a care coordination team that works with anybody who might be homeless to find a place, whether it's filling out a BRAP application or just getting into a shelter for the night. Mm-hmm. We also have that same care coordination team works to get people connected with mental health services, either at Tri-County or, I can't think of the other one. Sweetser, yes, Sweetser. And so we really are trying to connect them right from the beginning to get them the help that they need.
So there's no real halfway house or whatever you want to call it, or recovery residence is referred to as well in your program?
And not in our program, no.
Yeah. How do the patients, going back to their surroundings, which typically are not real, encouraging toward getting rid of addiction, whatever, how they've been able to do that, or hang out with the crowds that are different, or they tend to go to more group meetings, or what's the answer?
Well, there's several answers to that, but probably the primary one is the way that they interact with one another in group. That they talk about how they had to end their friends list on Facebook. They had to reduce the number of contacts that they had out there because of who they knew that had drugs. So they kind of support each other in doing that. But also in group, they'll get each other's phone numbers and get connected to one another that way. And but I do think that, especially in the beginning of treatment, severing ties is a very challenging part of treatment. And people you've known for years, but you have to stop hanging around with.
Thank you for working on this issue, which is extremely important in you and your team, so thanks. And I agree with the Council President, collaboration in this area. We've got, if we're all pulling in the same direction, it'll still be difficult. But let's at least try that as well. So.
Councilor Ray?
Thank you. Thank you both for joining us and presenting on this tonight. So I was trying to understand, you were saying that Androscoggin Jail is newly referring folks to you all, or could you speak a little bit more about what that relationship is?
Well, this is very new to us, and I really haven't been attached to it a lot.
Yep.
But that what we're trying to do is, I know that we have done for maybe a handful of folks, is to have them come directly from jail to our program to meet with the doctor and actually, they're doing most of the intake process in the jail. So we're sending a counselor to the jail to do the paperwork piece of it. And they can come directly to our program to see the doctor and begin their treatment that same day.
Okay.
Not with Anderson County. We haven't done it with Anderson.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kristen, do you have time?
Did I turn anything off? No?
Okay. Take a break till 7, folks. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will move on. The city clerk has a proclamation recognizing the service of retiring Public Works Director David Jones on his last day at work.
Jones.
Proclamation recognizing retiring Public Works Director Dave Jones. Whereas Dave Jones has served with commitment and follow-through for 19-plus years as Lewiston's Public Works Director, and whereas he led by example ride-along crew members, serving as an effective role model for getting the job done and getting it done right, and whereas his attitude about challenges being an opportunity to excel permeated the department and employees knew they had his confidence and support, and whereas from his stellar leadership and detailed reporting to freezing at water main breaks and festive laugh, Dave Jones will not be forgotten. And whereas Dave has left a legacy of respect, integrity, and top-notch performance, and we thank him for his outstanding contributions to the city of Lewiston and its residents. Whereas now, therefore, I, Shane D. Bouchard, Mayor of the City of Lewiston, do hereby officially recognize retiring Public Works Director Dave Jones for shining a bright light on exemplary public service. Presented this 8th day of January 2019, signed by the Mayor, Shane D. Bouchard.
Some position.
We're getting good at it, Dave. We're getting good at it.
All right, come closer.
Salaries.
Move it in.
If I look at him, can't see him.
Make sure that gets on Lewiston Rocks.
Yes, oh yes.
Okay?
Actually, no, but I do want to thank the mayor and council and the administration group for all the support over the years. So I was thinking about it the other day. I think I've had 4 city administrators since I've been here and 10 different councils while I've been here. But it's been a pleasure all the way through.
But this is your favorite one, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
And I guess you said it a lot, Dave, because Kevin brought it up at your retirement, but I'm going to start living by the phrase Kevin used of never miss an opportunity to sit down and shut up. I like that one. So thank you. Thank you for the wisdom. All right. Acceptance of minutes, December 18th, I believe, as amended. Councilor Ray and Councilor Cloutier. Keen eyes. I'll entertain a motion, a quick vote.
So moved.
Moved. Second. All in favor? Excellent. Public comment period. Any member of the public looking to make comments? Not about an item on tonight's agenda? This is your time. Okay, roll call.
All roll call votes for this meeting will begin with the Councilor of Ward 1.
Agenda item number 1.
Item number 1, public hearing on a new application for new liquor license for C&J Buddha Asian Bistro, 736 Sabattus Street. Requested action to authorize the city clerk's office to approve a new liquor license application for C&J Buddha Asian Bistro, 736 Sabattus Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor License, seconded by Councilor Ray. Council, public, back to the council. Call the roll.
Council from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Number 2.
Item number 2, public hearing on the renewal application for a special amusement permit for live entertainment for the Fraternal Order of Eagles, number 618, located at 1327 Sabattus Street. Requested action to grant a special amusement permit for live entertainment to the Fraternal Order of Eagles, number 618, located at 1327 Sabattus Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Marcotte, seconded by Councilor Cloutier. Any discussion? Public? For the council? And call the roll.
Council from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 3.
Item number 3, amendments to the city policy manual regarding the appointment and promotion process for the police department. Requested action to approve the amendments to the city policy manual, policy number 44, appointment and promotion in the police department as recommended by the chief of police.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Ray, finally get in from Councilor LaJoy. Questions on the council, except for the chief, if he could potentially give us a quick overview. That's what Councilor Cloutier was going to ask for anyway.
Yes, thank you.
I did submit that memo, I think you folks may have read. We were just going through the policies, and the first couple of changes are just some changes in terms of some wording. It initially, in the section in terms of the appointment, they have to take a psychological exam in order to gain entry into the police academy, and it said may, so we're just changing that to shall. It says they shall have a X-ray and an EKG. That would be more dependent upon when they have the physical, so that would say may. And that was pretty much going to be my only change. However, I was approached by the union, Patrol and Detectives Union, who wanted to make some changes. They'd held a couple of meetings and voted. When I call for a list for names for promotion, I get the top 5 names is what the policy initially says. The union wanted to change that to the top 10 names. I gave them all the paperwork I had from back in the late 80s when the unions changed it, because the promotions used to be just based on the score of your promotional exam. And that was if you were a good test taker, then you were going to get interviewed or possibly be promoted. So that was when we made the changes in terms of it was based on evaluation, years of service, the exam. If you had rank as a detective, you would get points for all that. So they had asked to make it the top 10. As an administrator, I think that's a great idea. And the union is something I want that gives me more latitude in my selection process and who I promote, so I was all for that. Another change in here is in order to be promoted to sergeant, the policy currently says you must have 3 years of experience as a Lewiston police officer. I've been here a little over 29 years now, and I don't feel any officer with 3 years of experience would be ready for the responsibilities of a sergeant's promotion, so they had asked it to go to 5 years, and I agreed with that as well. So the major change here is when I do a promotion now, when I call HR, I get the top 10 names as opposed to the top 5 names.
Questions for the chief?
So, in terms of that 5 to 10 increase, like how, in terms of scores, like how different are the folks?
That's the issue is, a lot of the difference between, say, number 5 and number 6 sometimes is 0.1 or 0.2. It's so close that the officers feel that this gives them all a better chance, because it's really minuscule, the amount, because the tests are pretty close, the evals are pretty close, the time on, once you have 5, 6, 7 years on. So it's a decimal point is what we're talking about, and that was why they wanted to expand it, because you could not be on the top 5 based on a 0.02, and they didn't feel that that was fair. And I agree with that that kind of expands it, gives people more of an opportunity.
Thank you.
Councilor Lyson?
Yeah, obviously, it doesn't say you have to interview 10 people or whatever. It's just a list that you can then choose to interview. Is that?
Well, that's what we do. We hold interviews, and we would interview the top 10. It used to be the top 5, and what we do is I have an interview panel that conducts those interviews.
Thank you.
Thank you, chief.
Okay.
And public? Back to the council. And call the roll.
Council from Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5? I'm sorry, Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 4.
Item number 4, public hearing and adoption of amendments to the city's policy manual regarding proposed amendments to the city's public participation plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program. There are 2 items for requested action. The first item is to conduct a public hearing on revisions to the Community Development Block Grant Program Citizen Participation Plan.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we don't have to vote on that, correct?
Correct.
And public hearing is opened. Going once. Okay, public hearing is closed, so part 2.
The next item, to approve the Citizens Participation Plan for the Community Development Program City Policy Manual Number 13, as recommended by the City Administrator and the Economic and Community Development Director.
So moved.
Motion by Councilor Lyson, seconded by Councilor Cloutier. Link?
I'll try to keep it short and sweet. This is really just meeting federal regulations. Over the last year, they have indicated, especially looking at Lewiston's population, that we needed to add both a representative from the immigrant community and a representative from the homeless community, which is really, the homeless one is really more of a national issue. We really didn't think it made sense to expand our committee beyond 7, so we went from having a city administrator appointed staff person, who in the past has been Sue Sharon, and we got rid of that designation, we got rid of the planning board designation, and we're replacing those 2 positions with a homeless designee and an immigrant designee. The other issue that has always sort of irked me is, for whatever reason, the appointments always started on July 1st. They were tied to the fiscal year, but the work of this committee starts on January 1st, is done before July 1st, most years. So this is just making it in concert with the reality of how this program works. In a nutshell, those are the changes. Oh, and the last thing was also, it was always a little fuzzy on what made a major change versus a minor change, and what it really boils down to is if there is going to be more than a 10% of the allocation plus program income each year, which depending on the year, you're about $85,000, $90,000. If we're going to make a change from what you folks approve each spring, we need to come back to the council. If it's a lesser amount, if we just need to add $2,000, $3,000 to a public works project just to get it done, we don't need to come back to the council to reallocate those dollars.
Councilor Lyson?
What are we expecting this year from the CDBG program?
We really have gotten no indication, especially with what's going on in Washington. We're about to get started towards the end of this month with the process, Jim, and we're just going to stick with what we had last year, which I think was $892,000, more or less, was the amount we received from CDBG, plus we get about $120,000 in program income each year, repayments on loans.
Anyone else? Councilor Markov?
Well, I have a few concerns here, because I can remember back in the 90s and attending planning board meetings that the review authority was the planning board in its entirety. Could you tell us when that changed to a subcommittee of sorts, with only one planning board member being a participant?
I was not here when that was the rule of the law, so it's always been a committee made up of citizens. I suspect it probably came down from federal regulation saying it should not be just citizens. I mean, planning board members are citizens, but they don't represent the citizens that are the low, moderate income people as a rule. Typically, planning boards have engineers, architects, lawyers, as well as just regular folks as well, but usually they're not low to moderate income people.
But also is seeing how the planning board is the keeper of the comp plan. I believe there should be some representation on this committee from that element. And kind of jumping to the next item that I had, changing the selection, the appointment schedule from July to January. I mean, I realize that you may not have a meeting before January, but people can get up to speed as to what's going to happen, because it's going to be a crunch between January and July to get things done, and especially if they're new members. Jumping right in, no opportunity to read up, get themselves familiarized with the process, to know what they're getting into. So I have an issue with that component of the changes as well.
Yeah, the truth is, Mike, is that we do start in January, regardless of the appointment schedule. At least if they're appointed on July 1st, they're going to be a full year before they even get to it. We've got a committee that needs to make recommendations to this group. Come May is when they get approved, and we'll have an initial recommendation in late March, and then we finalize it in May. So if we appointed people to this committee, we'd have nobody sitting there doing this work until July 1.
And coming back to my previous thought, community development block grant development, and whereas the planning board is the keeper of the comp plan, responsible for long-range planning for the community,
for growth and success. I really truly believe that there needs to be representation on this committee from the planning board.
Okay, anyone else?
Just, Link, I'm thinking back, I started with the city in '88 as the planning director, and it was by then always a committee, as far as I remember.
Okay.
You know, and there was obviously staff included in that committee as well. But it wasn't a planning board driven process, not that they didn't provide input, but.
Okay, and that's why, and I've been with the city since 2000, so at least that far back in '88. And that's not to say that a planning board member should not be appointed, it's just to have it as a designated seat. I think I don't disagree, Mike, it doesn't hurt, I think it's a good thing to have a planning board member.
There may have been a separate committee of sorts, but the planning board deliberated over it and made a recommendation to the council. That was taken away at some point, and only one member of the planning board was the liaison, which was probably the compromise for taking that review authority away.
I would also guess this may have been the issue where sort of trying to have a defined role for each party. Planning board typically, and they make recommendations on financial considerations, but that's really the city council's purview. It's not the planning board's purview. The planning board does make recommendations on the LCIP, but at the end of the day, they're not the ones approving funding. Similarly with CDBG, they can make a recommendation, but they're not the ones approving funding. It's the city council's purview.
It still comes down to a lot of what's decided and how to spend this block grant affects the development of the community into the future, and the planning board has a role in that process.
Noted. All right. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
No.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
No.
Motion passed by a vote of 5 to 2.
Agenda item number 5.
Item number 5, order authorizing the city administrator to execute a lease between the City of Lewiston and Androscoggin Head Start and Child Care. Requested action to approve the order authorizing the city administrator to execute the lease between the City of Lewiston and Androscoggin Head Start and Child Care.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilor Cloutier, seconded by Councilor Joy. Ed, could you give us a 30-second rundown?
Basically, the city's had a lease agreement with Androscoggin Head Start and Child Care for them to use the old school building located over on Bates Street next to Trinity Church. That lease has expired in September, and they're seeking a renewal for another 20 years. They are responsible for all the maintenance and costs associated with the building. We've had it inspected by our building people. They are doing a good job taking care of it. So this would basically just be renewing or entering into a new 20-year lease under the same terms and conditions that were there in the last lease.
Questions from the council? Councilor Marco.
With regards to the lease, are there opportunities for them to walk away, to inform us that they can no longer continue with operating?
Missing a page.
Because I wonder what happens if they want to cease operations. Will they be responsible for making payments to us for the duration of the lease?
Heather's looking now. I will apologize. It should have had the whole lease in the document. Apparently, it only has one of the 2 pages.
Both parties can provide a 30-day notice in writing for intent to terminate.
Okay.
Councilor Ray.
And when did this lease begin, the first term?
I'm sorry, excuse me?
When did the terms of the first lease begin? So how long has this been?
Do you know when it started? I know it's been a very long time. You'll need to come up to the mic, thanks.
Good evening. I'm Betsy Norcross-Plord. I'm the director at Promise, the Head Start program here in Androscoggin County. I've only been there 7 years as the director. I can't tell you. I can tell you as a program, we have operated in this community for more than 50, and I know that for more than 30 or 35, it might be more than 40, we've been located on Bates Street, at 269 Bates Street.
I know it's been there
So,
the 30 years I've been
yes. So we are not planning to go anywhere. We are a program in good standing, both at a state level and at a federal level. And as I said, we've been here more than 50 years, so we're not looking to terminate our arrangement. And we appreciate the opportunity to be in a building which allows us to be in an area of great need for our services here in Lewiston.
All right, took care of public, I think. And call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Agenda item number 6.
Item number 6, resolve authorizing submission of an EPA brownfield cleanup grant application for Bates Mill number 5. Requested action to approve the resolve authorizing submission of an EPA brownfield cleanup grant application for Bates Mill number 5.
So moved. Second.
Oh, gosh.
Motion by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Lyson. Link?
Yeah, this is our third time stepping up to the plate on this one. Bad news is we didn't get grants in the past. Good news is the amount of the grant increased from $200,000 to $500,000 this year. Both Heidi McCarthy, who is our new economic development specialist, will be the one writing this grant. She and I were down in Portland a couple of weeks back going through the training. Jim Burns, who is the EPA administrator for this region and has had a lot of experience with us at the Bates Mill, sort of pulled me aside and said, Link, your grant was this close last year. Basically dust it off, polish it up, cut a few pages because of the new grant parameters, and I think you've got a very good chance of being funded. We are updating the various analysis on what it will cost to do the renovation, so even at $500,000, that'll help quite a bit. But if the mill itself actually gets redeveloped, it's a little over $1 million is what we expect needs to be used for brownfield cleanup. So half of that would come from this grant. One of the parameters of the grant is we need a 20% match. You don't need to approve the funding tonight. It can be any one of a number of city resources to help meet that match requirement. But if we get the $500,000 grant, we will need to match that with $100,000. CDBG is one of the possible sources for that. Reason I'm before you tonight is we don't really, just before I had Heidi invest the time to write this grant, I wanted to make sure that the council was supportive of this. And the last piece would be, if the mill does not get redeveloped, we still need to clean it up. The amount of money we'll spend will be less. If we get a $500,000 grant, my memo had said, I think it was $325,000 or so, is what, if we ultimately tear it down, that's about what we think the cleanup costs will be. We don't have to spend all $500,000. We'd actually have all our costs covered. So I think it's sort of a belt and suspenders. It'll serve as well. Either way it goes with the mill.
Questions from council? Council Markov?
What would have happened if any one of these options, maybe even as far as 10 years ago, had been executed? Would we have been responsible for this cleanup?
Yes, this would be part of the various, we would have been, if the option had been done with a joint development agreement, that's one of the terms that's been in the joint development agreement. It was part of the Bates-Salo agreement. That's going to be one of the pieces you see if this mill gets redeveloped. That will be
We
part
would
of
have
the
had to
mix.
fund that somehow?
Yeah.
Even
It's a council decision. It's not my decision, it's the council
Well,
decision, but if you want to
So
see
if it had been executed 10 years ago and there was no grant available at the time, then we would have been on the hook for the entire cleanup, whatever that
And
number.
that's part of the pro forma with the building. That's part of the decision-making for the council.
Okay.
No public, so thank you, Link. And call the roll.
Counsel from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Thank you.
Number 7.
Item number 7, appointments to various city boards and committees. There are 2 items. The first item is to receive the mayor's appointments to various city boards and committees, and no council action is required. And the mayor's appointments are on the following pages under agenda item 7. We'll be happy to read them for the benefit of the public, or they're printed in everyone's book as well. And then the next item is to approve the mayor's nominations regarding his appointments to the Library Board of Trustees, and that does require a council action. That's on page 2 of your background material there.
So move. Second.
Motion by Councilor LaJoy, seconded by Councilor Cloutier. Any discussion? There still is one more library board position open. Just received 2 applications yesterday, so we'll be talking. Other than that, Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
And Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Number 8.
Item number 8, biennial appointment of the Registrar of Voters. Requested action to appoint City Clerk Kathleen M. Monteo as the Registrar of Voters for a 2-year term of office from January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Lyson, seconded by Counselor Cloutier. Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Who is she, anyway?
Item number 9, amendment to the traffic schedule regarding prohibiting overnight winter parking for a portion of Park Street. Requested action to adopt the proposed amendments to the traffic schedule for Park Street to prohibit overnight winter parking from December 1 through March 31 from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. on both sides of the street between Pine Street and Spruce Street.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Counselor Cloutier, seconded by Counselor Ray. Questions from council? Counselor Lyson?
Is that December 1 through the March 31 standard throughout the whole city? Wasn't there a change recently?
It used to be longer into the spring.
It used to be to April 15th or
Yeah, it used to be to
something.
April 15th. We moved it back to March.
And we have that on on certain sides of the streets that time now, too.
Okay, great, thank you.
Counselor Marcotte?
Since I come in and pick up my packet late at night on many occasions, I see various vehicles parked in front of City Hall. Was there any investigation done as to who's using it and what their needs were?
What we were requested for this change from Public Works, and really it's actually beyond City Hall where there's some residents that sometimes park. Sergeant St. Laurent was checking the cameras that we have there, and we've actually spoken to Weston Property Management that manages the apartment building right next door, and they're all supportive of this. My hope is as well that this will allow Public Works easier opportunity to clear the sidewalk as you walk along here as well. If you're talking about the 2 public work vehicles that are still parked there? Okay,
No,
well, we do have occasional vehicles that park here, but that would be probably people that live over at 25 Pine
Yeah,
Street.
usually they're walking in that direction. You didn't do any investigation as to their need for parking spaces,
Well, we spoke to the property management over there.
but not the one over there?
Not over there, no, sir. We did not.
Anyone else? Call the roll.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
No.
Motion passed by a vote of 6-1.
All right, and we are reports and updates. We have a report from our school committee representative.
Yes, I'm very excited to report that we are meeting 4 times this week for the school committee to work on our superintendent interviews. This week we are interviewing 6 candidates. We're trying to be very transparent about this process, so I'm going to run through all of that. These are all being done via Skype interview, and on Friday we will meet to narrow that field down to our semifinalists. That could be anywhere between 2 and 4 folks, who we then bring to Lewiston for days in the district. As part of those days in the district, there will be opportunity for public input. We, again, don't know if it will be 2, 3, 4 candidates who will be here as semifinalists, so we don't have exact dates and times yet, but as soon as we do, we will share those with the public. We also will be meeting in regular session on Monday, January 14th, to do our usual business. So thanks.
Okay. Do you want to announce the census, Jim?
Pardon me? Yeah, for public's sake, and both Council President Cloutier and myself attended a census meeting. Census 2020 is starting their process. There's some employment opportunities I wanted to let people know about out there. And we're going to get some things up on our city website as well during this whole process. And again, one of the big messages was how important it is to get a correct number. And one of the rules of collecting that data that I wanted to share with everybody, it's where you live on April 1st, 2020 is where you're counted. So if you move and whatever, but it's where you lived on April 20th, and there'll be a number of ways of getting the information. The information is not shared result-wise, and they're tying things into properties and making sure that people in properties that are not vacant are being talked to, and a survey form is being filled out. I don't know if it's new that it's online this year.
I think it's new that they're doing so much online.
Yeah. And one of the other things is that they will bring mobile computer trucks that will visit sites when they're invited, to allow people who don't have access to computers to get online to fill out the survey. Couple things that are uncertain yet is, I think there's a question on citizenship this year. And the census people were against that, and because of the fear and intimidation of information these days, that people would feel reluctant to come forward and say that, yeah, I'm not a citizen. But that still remains to be seen on how that's going to be addressed. But again, this information is not shared. There's no name sequence. It's really, again, important for, I think it said $676 billion annually gets allocated based upon population. So it's important for us to make sure that we get that, our equitable fair share based upon our population. So again, this was a kickoff meeting. There's lots of information, and one of the things I did recommend is that let's put it on our website. Let's announce it at the City Council, at the meetings, and make sure that the public knows that this happens every 10 years, so we're at 2020, and it's critically important for us as we plan our future to make sure that we have an understanding of what our population is. I think there's been, admittedly, by the census, some undercounting, especially in downtown areas where people move a lot, and also low-income people, and now with some of the language barriers that are presented with our new mayor population, we know we've got a challenge ahead of us, and we want to make sure that we're counting people, and that's we'll be continuing to make the announcements at the council, and make sure that it gets on our city website, some of the information, and especially about some of the job opportunities that the census has and needs. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I just wanted to add that it is on the city's Facebook page already. Dottie did that today, so.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Any other business? Okay. Councilor Lyson.
Yes, I'd make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to MRSA Title I, Section 405(6)A, to discuss a personnel matter regarding the annual evaluation of the city administrator.